After a $1.3 million quiet luxury fantasy, the husband left. My revenge-exposed liar, bank manager called. My pen stopped mid-stroke. The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the air conditioning humming through the vents. Slowly, very slowly, I removed my glasses and looked up at my clerk, whose face had gone pale. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" My voice was steady, controlled. 15 years on the bench had taught me to maintain composure even when the ground shifted beneath my feet. My clerk, Patricia, a woman who had been with me for over a decade, stood frozen with the file in her hands. "Your Honor, the case was assigned randomly through the system. I only just received the file this morning and the plaintiff's name," I interrupted quietly. "Repeat it." "Mallory Prescott, Your Honor." Mallory Prescott. The name tasted like copper in my mouth. My ex-husband Daniel's new wife, the woman he'd left me for 3 years ago, though new was a relative term considering their affair had started 2 years before our divorce was finalized. I took a slow breath, my fingers drumming once against the mahogany bench. The courtroom was filling with the usual morning crowd, attorneys with their briefcases, plaintiffs, defendants, court reporters. None of them knew that the esteemed Judge Victoria Castellano, known for her ice-cold demeanor and unshakable composure, was currently fighting the urge to laugh at the absurdity of the universe. "Approach the bench," I said quietly. Counsel for both parties, my clerk, and the court reporter. The shuffle of feet and the rustle of papers followed. I watched as 2 attorneys made their way forward. I recognized the plaintiff's attorney immediately, Marcus Chen, a personal injury lawyer who specialized in what the legal community politely called creative litigation, and what I privately called ambulance chasing with a law degree. The defense attorney was someone I'd never seen before, a young woman who looked fresh out of law school, probably from a small firm that handled general civil matters. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice oozing with practiced sympathy. "My client, Mrs. Mallory Prescott, has been subjected to a systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation by the defendant." I held up one hand. "Mr. Chen, before you continue, I need to address a potential conflict of interest." I kept my voice neutral, judicial. "Patricia, please note for the record that the defendant in this case shares my surname." Marcus's eyes widened slightly. The defense attorney, whose nameplate read Sarah Kim, looked confused. "The defendant," I continued, maintaining that same level tone, "is listed as Judge Victoria Castellano. I am Judge Victoria Castellano. It appears, Mr. Chen, that your client has sued me personally." The silence that followed was delicious. I watched Marcus's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then dawning horror as he flipped frantically through his file. "Your Honor, there must be some mistake. The complaint clearly states—" He was scanning pages now, his confident veneer cracking. "My client informed me that the defendant was a judge, but I assumed she meant it as a title of respect, not an actual—" "Let me see that complaint," I said, extending my hand. Marcus handed it over with trembling fingers. I began to read, and with each paragraph, the situation became more surreal and, quite frankly, more insulting. The complaint alleged that I, Judge Victoria Castellano, had engaged in a pattern of harassment against Mallory Prescott, including following her to various locations around the city, making threatening phone calls, sending menacing text messages, vandalizing her property, and, this one was particularly creative, using my position as a judge to intimidate her and interfere with her marriage to Daniel Prescott. I looked up from the document, my expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Chen, you filed a lawsuit against a sitting judge without verifying the most basic facts of your case. Your Honor, I relied on my client's representation that—" "That's not an answer to my question." My voice could have frozen water. "Miss Kim, I assume you were equally blindsided by this development." Sarah Kim nodded vigorously. "Your Honor, I was appointed to this case yesterday afternoon. I've barely had time to review the file, and I certainly had no idea that my client was you." I set the complaint down and leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. "Here's what's going to happen. First, I'm going to recuse myself from this case because, obviously, I cannot preside over a lawsuit filed against me. Second, Mr. Chen, you and your client are going to have a very serious conversation about the potential consequences of filing a frivolous lawsuit. Third—" "Ibrecki, Your Honor," Marcus interrupted, his voice taking on a pleading quality. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, like this video." It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story," he continued. "I request permission to withdraw the complaint immediately. This has clearly been a misunderstanding, and I apologize for wasting the court's time." "Denied," I said sharply. "You don't get to slink away that easily, Mr. Chen. This case will proceed, just not in my courtroom. Patricia, please note that I am recusing myself and request that the case be reassigned immediately to another judge in this district." I looked down at the complaint again, my mind already working through the implications. Mallory Prescott had just made a catastrophic error. By filing this lawsuit, she had created a public record of her allegations. Allegations that, if proven false, could have serious legal consequences for her. And I knew they were false. Every single one of them. "One more thing," I added, fixing Marcus with a stare that had made hardened criminals squirm. "Mr. Chen, I strongly suggest you investigate your client's claims thoroughly before this case proceeds any further. In my experience, when someone accuses a judge of harassment, the scrutiny tends to flow in both directions." "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus mumbled, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "This matter is continued pending reassignment." Dismissed. As the courtroom cleared, I sat in my chair for a long moment, the complaint still in my hands. Patricia approached cautiously. "Your Honor, I've already sent the reassignment request through the system. Judge Morrison should be able to take it. Judge Elizabeth Morrison. Fair, thorough, and utterly no-nonsense." "Perfect. Thank you, Patricia." I stood, gathering my files. "I'll be in my chambers. Hold my other cases for 30 minutes. My chambers were a sanctuary of dark wood and leather-bound law books. I closed the door behind me and finally allowed myself to react. I didn't laugh. That would come later, perhaps with a glass of wine. Instead, I sat behind my desk and really read the complaint. The allegations were detailed, specific, and completely fabricated. According to Mallory, I had been stalking her for the past 6 months. She claimed I showed up at her yoga studio, her favorite coffee shop, even outside her home. She alleged that I'd sent her dozens of text messages from blocked numbers, threatening her and telling her to stay away from what's mine. The property damage allegation was particularly bold. She claimed I'd keyed her car in a grocery store parking lot and slashed her tires on 2 separate occasions. And then there was the pièce de résistance. She alleged that I had used my judicial connections to have Daniel investigated by the State Bar Association, jeopardizing his legal career, all because I couldn't accept that our marriage was over. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my calendar for the past 6 months. Every day was accounted for: court sessions, judicial conferences, evening lectures at the law school where I taught as an adjunct professor. My life was documented, scheduled, and utterly transparent. The yoga studio she mentioned? I'd never been there. The coffee shop? Not my style. I made my coffee at home. The grocery store incident? I could probably pull security footage showing I was in court that day. As for Daniel's bar investigation, that had been initiated by one of his own clients, who filed a complaint about misappropriated funds. I'd had nothing to do with it, though I'd certainly enjoyed hearing about it through the legal community grapevine. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in." Sarah Kim entered, looking nervous. "Your Honor, I hope it's appropriate for me to speak with you, given that you've recused yourself." "It's fine, Miss Kim. I assume you're here in your capacity as the defendant's attorney, even though the defendant is currently me." The absurdity of that sentence wasn't lost on either of us. "I wanted to apologize for the confusion and assure you that I had no idea." I waved her off. "You're not responsible for your client's identity, Miss Kim, though I am curious how you ended up representing me." She relaxed slightly. "I work for a small general practice firm. When this case was filed, it was flagged as a harassment claim with a judge as the defendant. My senior partner thought it would be good experience for me. And since the retainer was already paid—" She stopped, her eyes widening. "The retainer was paid in cash. $3,000. Interesting," I murmured. "That suggests some premeditation on the plaintiff's part. Your Honor, can I speak candidly?" "Off the record, yes." Sarah took a breath. "This case is garbage. I've been reviewing the allegations, and even with my limited experience, I can see the holes. There's no evidence provided. No photos, no witness statements, no phone records. Just the plaintiff's sworn statement. Welcome to the exciting world of frivolous litigation, Ms. Kim." I leaned back in my chair. "Here's what you need to understand. Your client just sued a sitting judge. That means everything about this case will be scrutinized at a level you've never experienced. Every I will be dotted, every T crossed." "I understand, Your Honor." "Do you?" I fixed her with a level stare, because your client just opened a door that she may not want to walk through. When you defend me against these allegations, you're going to uncover things about the plaintiff that she probably doesn't want revealed. Sarah's expression sharpened. You're saying there's more to this story. I'm saying that people who file false harassment claims usually have their own reasons for doing so, reasons that don't hold up well under oath. Brooke. I stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. I'm also saying that I'm going to be watching this case very carefully, Ms. Kim. Not as the defendant, I'll let you handle that, but as someone who has a vested interest in seeing justice served. I won't let you down, Your Honor. After she left, I made a phone call to my brother Marcus. Not to be confused with Marcus Chen, thank goodness. My brother Marcus was a private investigator who specialized in cases that required discretion and thorough documentation. Vic, he answered on the second ring. Please tell me you're not calling from jail. Why would I be calling from jail? Because you're calling me in the middle of a workday, which usually means something dramatic has happened. I smiled despite myself. Daniel's new wife just sued me for harassment. The silence on the other end lasted 3 full seconds. I'm sorry, what? I explained the situation while Marcus listened without interruption, a rare occurrence for my typically vocal brother. So, let me get this straight, he said when I finished. Mallory Prescott filed a lawsuit against you, a judge, alleging that you've been stalking her and vandalizing her property. That's the gist of it. And she did this without any evidence whatsoever. Apparently, her sworn statement was considered sufficient to file. Marcus laughed, a deep belly laugh that made me smile. Vic, I don't know whether to be impressed by her audacity or concerned about her judgment. I'm leaning toward the latter, I admitted. Marcus, I need you to do something for me. Already on it. You want me to document your whereabouts for the past 6 months and compile evidence that contradicts every allegation she's made? That, and I want to know why she filed this lawsuit in the first place. People don't sue judges for harassment without a reason, even a bad one. You think there's something else going on? I thought about Daniel, about the way he'd looked at me when he admitted the affair, the mixture of guilt and defiance in his eyes. I thought about Mallory, whom I'd met exactly twice, once at a charity function before I knew who she was, and once in a courthouse after the divorce when she'd smiled at me with what I could only describe as victorious smugness. I think Mallory Prescott wants something, I said slowly, and I think this lawsuit is her way of trying to get it. Any idea what that might be? Not yet, but I intend to find out. After ending the call, I spent the rest of the morning reviewing my calendar, pulling bank statements and gathering every piece of documentation that could prove my innocence. It was tedious work, but necessary. By the time Patricia knocked on my door to let me know my afternoon docket was ready, I had assembled a preliminary defense that would make any prosecutor weep with envy. The afternoon proceeded normally, bail hearings, motion arguments, a sentencing that required more thought than usual. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking about Mallory's lawsuit, about the implications and possibilities. At 5 o'clock, I returned to my chambers to find an email from the clerk's office. The case had been reassigned to Judge Morrison, and the first hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks from today. I would have to appear as a defendant in a courtroom where I usually commanded respect and authority. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was packing my briefcase when Patricia knocked again. Your Honor, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent. Who is it? Daniel Prescott. Brooke. I felt my spine stiffen. Tell Mr. Prescott that I'm not available. I already did. He says he'll wait. Of course he would. Daniel had always been persistent, even when persistence crossed the line into stubbornness. I considered having security escort him out, but curiosity got the better of me. Send him in. But, Patricia, I want you to stay in the outer office with the door open. Daniel entered my chambers looking haggard. The confident attorney I'd married 10 years ago had been replaced by someone who looked like he hadn't slept in days. His suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of stress and possibly something stronger than stress. Victoria, he began, and I held up a hand. Judge Castellano, Mr. Prescott. We're not on informal terms anymore. He flinched. Right, Judge Castellano, I need to talk to you about Mallory's lawsuit. You mean the frivolous harassment claim your wife filed against me this morning? I remained standing, not offering him a seat. The one that accuses me of stalking, vandalism, and abuse of judicial power. I didn't know she was going to do it, Daniel said quickly. I swear, Victoria. Judge Castellano, I had no idea until the papers were filed. When I found out, I tried to get her to withdraw it, but she refused. Abre, why are you here, Daniel? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from our marriage, usually deployed when he'd done something wrong and was trying to find the words to explain it. Because I know you didn't do any of those things. I know Mallory's allegations are false. Then you should probably testify to that effect when the case goes to trial. It won't go to trial. Mallory will drop it before then. I tilted my head, studying him. You seem very certain of that. I know my wife. Do you? I moved behind my desk, creating a physical barrier between us. Because the woman who filed that lawsuit this morning doesn't sound like someone who's going to back down easily. She sounds like someone with a plan. Daniel's face paled. What do you mean? I mean that your wife didn't accidentally sue a sitting judge, Daniel. She didn't mistakenly file a lawsuit filled with false allegations that could expose her to serious legal consequences. She did this intentionally, which means she wants something. The question is what? He looked away, and in that moment, I knew. Daniel knew exactly why Mallory had filed this lawsuit. Tell me, I said quietly. What does she want? I can't, Daniel whispered. Victoria, please, can you just make this go away? Can you talk to the judge who's handling the case and explain that it's all a misunderstanding? I laughed, a sharp bark of sound that made him jump. Are you seriously asking me to use my judicial influence to make your wife's frivolous lawsuit disappear? The very thing she's accused me of doing in her complaint? No, I just meant, get out of my chambers, Daniel, and if you come here again without a subpoena, I'll have you arrested for harassment. He opened his mouth to protest, then seemed to think better of it. As he turned to leave, I called out one more time. Daniel, he paused at the doorway. Whatever Mallory is planning, whatever she thinks she's going to accomplish with this lawsuit, it's going to backfire spectacularly. You might want to prepare yourself for that. After he left, I sat down heavily in my chair. Patricia appeared in the doorway, her expression concerned. Your Honor, are you all right? I'm fine, Patricia. Just processing the surreal nature of my day. For what it's worth, she said carefully, everyone in this courthouse knows those allegations are false. Judge Morrison already told me she's looking forward to educating Mrs. Prescott on the consequences of filing baseless claims. I smiled despite myself. That sounds like Elizabeth. That evening, I drove home to my townhouse in the historic district, a place I'd bought after the divorce, wanting a fresh start away from the memories of my marriage. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled on my couch with my laptop, beginning the meticulous work of building my defense. But as I worked, my mind kept returning to Daniel's visit, to the fear in his eyes and the way he'd said, I know my wife. What was Mallory Prescott really after? And why was Daniel so afraid? The answers I suspected were going to be far more interesting than the lawsuit itself. Hey bro, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Preliminary research complete. You're going to want to see this. Can I come by tomorrow morning? I typed back. My place, 7 a.m., bring coffee. As I closed my laptop for the night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. Not the dread of dealing with a frivolous lawsuit, but the excitement of unraveling a puzzle. Mallory Prescott had made a mistake when she sued me. She'd assumed that being a judge would make me cautious, would make me want to settle quietly to avoid the embarrassment of a public trial. She'd assumed wrong. I'd spent 15 years on the bench watching people lie under oath, fabricate evidence, and manipulate the legal system. I developed an instinct for deception, a nose for schemes hidden beneath layers of false testimony. And right now, every instinct I had was telling me that Mallory's lawsuit was just the opening move in a much larger game. Well, I thought, finishing my wine, two can play. The next morning, Marcus arrived at precisely 7 o'clock with 2 large coffees and a thick file folder. My brother was a contradiction. He had the build of a linebacker, but the methodical mind of a chess player. People underestimated him constantly, which made him an excellent investigator. You look terrible, he said by way of greeting, handing me a coffee. I didn't sleep much. Understandable. Your ex-husband's new wife suing you for harassment would keep most people up at night. He settled onto my couch, opening his folder. But I think what I found is going to keep you up for entirely different reasons. I sat across from him, cradling my coffee. Tell me. Let's start with the easy stuff, your alibi for every allegation Mallory made. He pulled out a document. The yoga studio incident she claimed happened on September 15th. You were presiding over a preliminary hearing in a murder trial. I pulled the court transcripts. The hearing lasted from 9 a.m. until 2:30 p.m. The yoga studio is 40 minutes from the courthouse. What about the coffee shop? October 3rd, you were giving a lecture at the law school that evening. I have the attendance sheet with your signature. The alleged incident happened at 7 p.m. Your lecture didn't end until 8:30. The car vandalism? Vibrissi Marcus smiled. Now this is where it gets interesting. Mallory claims you keyed her car on November 2nd in the Whole Foods parking lot on Maple Street. I pulled your credit card records. You were shopping at the Trader Joe's on Oak Street at the exact time she claims the incident occurred. Different store, different part of the city. He paused dramatically, and I pulled the security footage from Trader Joe's. You're clearly visible entering the store at 6:15 p.m. and leaving at 6:42 p.m. A brusherie. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. So, I have a documented alibi for every single allegation. Every single one, Marcus confirmed. But Vic, that's not the interesting part. What is? He pulled out another document, this one with highlighted sections. I did some digging into Mallory's background. She's been married before. Twice, actually. Both marriages ended in divorce within 3 years. That's not particularly unusual. No, but this is... Both ex-husbands filed restraining orders against her. Both claimed she engaged in harassment and made false allegations when they tried to end the relationships. I set down my coffee, suddenly very alert. False allegations. The first husband, Richard Chen, no relation to her current lawyer, by the way, claimed Mallory accused him of domestic violence when he filed for divorce. The case was investigated thoroughly and dismissed due to lack of evidence. Richard's restraining order was granted because Mallory kept showing up at his workplace and his home, claiming they were meant to be together. The second husband, James Rivera, similar pattern. When he filed for divorce, Mallory claimed he was having an affair. She filed a lawsuit against the woman she accused of being the other woman. That lawsuit was dismissed as frivolous. James also got a restraining order after Mallory vandalized his car and sent threatening letters to his employer. I processed this information slowly. So, Mallory has a history of making false allegations and harassing behavior when relationships end. That's the pattern, Marcus confirmed. But here's where it gets really interesting. I looked into her marriage to Daniel. They got married 18 months ago, right? About that, yes. Well, 6 months ago, Daniel filed for legal separation. I stared at my brother. What? He withdrew it 3 weeks later, but the filing is on record. Daniel wanted out of the marriage, Vic, and based on Mallory's history, I'm guessing she didn't take it well. My mind was racing. Daniel's visit yesterday, his fear, the way he'd said, I know my wife, with such resignation. It all made sense now. She's threatened him, I said slowly. Mallory threatened Daniel, probably told him she'd make his life hell if he left her, and when that wasn't enough to control him, she needed a different strategy. Enter the lawsuit against you, Marcus finished. If she can paint herself as a victim of harassment from Daniel's ex-wife, she can explain away any erratic behavior as trauma. If Daniel tries to leave her again, she can claim he's abandoning her during a difficult time. She's building a narrative, and you're the villain in her story. Burpress Marcus nodded grimly. The question is, does she ultimately want? I thought about it, about the pattern of behavior, about Daniel's fear and Mallory's calculated choice to sue a sitting judge. She wants Daniel trapped. The lawsuit, the public accusation, the drama, it all ties Daniel to her. If he leaves her now, after she's filed this lawsuit, it looks like he's abandoning his victimized wife. His reputation takes a hit. His legal career, which is already on shaky ground because of that bar complaint, gets even shakier. So, the lawsuit isn't really about you at all, Marcus said. It's about controlling Daniel. Exactly. And I'm just collateral damage. Burke. I stood up, pacing my living room. But she made a mistake, Marcus. She chose the wrong person to use as a prop in her scheme. What are you going to do? I turned to face my brother, and I could feel the familiar weight of judicial authority settling over me. Not the authority to rule from the bench, but the authority that came from knowing the law, understanding its intricacies, and knowing exactly how to use it. I'm going to let Sarah Kim do her job and defend me brilliantly, which she will once she sees all this evidence, I said. But I'm also going to make sure that Mallory's pattern of behavior is exposed. Not vindictively, just factually. Let the court see exactly who filed this lawsuit and why. Marcus grinned. You're going to use discovery. I'm going to use every legal tool available. Mallory opened this door when she sued me. She probably thought I'd settle quickly to avoid embarrassment. Instead, I'm going to walk through that door and examine every aspect of her allegations. And when we're done, the court will see exactly what kind of pattern she's established. Ibram, what about Daniel? That was the complicated part. Despite everything, the affair, the lies, the way our marriage had ended, I didn't hate Daniel. I'd stopped feeling much of anything for him years ago, but I didn't want to see him destroyed by someone else's manipulation either. I'll give him a choice, I said finally. Once Mallory's pattern is exposed, once the evidence is clear, I'll let Daniel decide whether he wants to stay in that marriage or not, but I'll make sure he knows the truth. All of it. Marcus stood up, gathering his files. You know, this is going to get messy. It's already messy. The difference is now I know what I'm dealing with. After Marcus left, I spent the rest of the morning organizing the evidence and preparing a comprehensive file for Sarah Kim. Then I did something I rarely did. I called in sick to work. I needed time to think, to strategize, to prepare for what was coming. That afternoon, I met with Sarah at a coffee shop far from the courthouse, far from anywhere I might run into colleagues or attorneys who practiced before me. She arrived exactly on time, carrying a worn leather briefcase and looking both nervous and excited. "Thank you for meeting with me, Your Honor," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Under the circumstances, you can call me Victoria, at least when we're discussing this case." She relaxed slightly. "Victoria, then. I have to admit, I've never had a case quite like this before. Neither have I, and I've been in the legal system for 20 years. I slid the file Marcus had prepared across the table. "Read this, all of it." Sarah opened the file and began reading. I watched her expressions change as she processed the information, confusion giving way to understanding, understanding giving way to outrage. "This is," she started, then stopped. "This is a pattern. Mallory Prescott has done this before. Twice before, at least. And I suspect there's more if we dig deeper. The restraining orders, the false allegations." "Exactly," I said, "which means we need to approach this strategically. Here's what I'm thinking. We file a comprehensive response that includes every alibi, every piece of evidence that contradicts her allegations. Then we file for discovery, extensive discovery. We request Mallory's phone records, her financial records, any documentation related to her previous marriages and the restraining orders." "Shall fight it," Sarah said immediately. "Her attorney will claim it's not relevant. Then we argue that it goes to credibility. If Mallory has a documented history of making false allegations, that's absolutely relevant to whether her current allegations are credible." I paused. And here's the beautiful part. By suing me, Mallory made her credibility the central issue. Every piece of her history is now fair game. Sarah was nodding, her legal mind clearly working through the strategy. "We could also depose Daniel Prescott. He's listed as a witness in her complaint." "He is. And under oath, Daniel will have to tell the truth about their marriage, about the separation filing, about everything." I met Sarah's eyes. "I'm not trying to destroy Mallory Prescott, despite what she's accused me of, but I am going to make sure the truth comes out. When do we start?" "Tomorrow. File the response with all the alibis and evidence, then immediately file a motion for expedited discovery, citing the urgent need to defend against false allegations that could damage my professional reputation." I pulled out another document. "I've already drafted most of it. You'll need to review and revise as appropriate, but this should give you a framework." Sarah took the document, scanning it quickly. "This is thorough, very thorough. I've had a lot of time to think about it." We spent the next 2 hours going over strategy, discussing potential arguments Mallory's attorney might make, and preparing for every contingency. By the time we finished, Sarah looked energized, her earlier nervousness replaced by focused determination. "I won't let you down," she said as we prepared to leave. "I know you won't. You're a good attorney, Sarah. Don't let anyone, especially not Marcus Chen, make you think otherwise." That evening, I returned home to find a message on my answering machine. Yes, I still had an answering machine, a relic from my marriage that I'd never bothered to replace. The voice on the recording made my blood run cold. "Judge Castellano, this is Mallory Prescott. I know you received my lawsuit today. I want you to know that I'm not backing down. You ruined my life by refusing to let go of Daniel, and now everyone is going to see what kind of person you really are. You can't hide behind your position as a judge forever. The truth always comes out." The message ended with a click. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the machine, feeling a mixture of disbelief and cold anger. She just made another mistake. I immediately called Marcus. I need you to come over right now and make a copy of a voicemail I just received. What did she say? Mallory Prescott just left me a threatening message on my home phone. And Marcus, she just gave us more evidence of her pattern of harassment. While I waited for Marcus to arrive, I replayed the message several times, noting every word, every nuance of tone. Mallory had been angry, yes, but there was something else in her voice, a kind of desperate satisfaction, as if she was enjoying the drama she'd created. Marcus arrived within 20 minutes with recording equipment. He made 3 copies of the voicemail while I documented the exact time I'd received it and the circumstances of its discovery. "This is gold, Vic," Marcus said, reviewing the recording. "She's admitting to retaliatory intent. She's acknowledging that the lawsuit is about revenge, not about actual harassment. And she's demonstrating the exact behavior she's accused me of. Calling my personal number, leaving threatening messages, making accusations about my motives. The irony is almost poetic." I managed a thin smile, almost. After Marcus left, I sat alone in my living room with a glass of wine and allowed myself to really think about what was happening. Mallory Prescott had launched what she probably thought was a devastating attack against me. She'd filed a lawsuit designed to embarrass me, damage my reputation, and control her husband. Instead, she'd given me exactly what I needed to expose her pattern of behavior and protect myself from her allegations. But there was still a part of me that wondered, was this really just about controlling Daniel? Or was there something deeper that I wasn't seeing yet? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You can't win this. Everyone will believe me over you. You're just a bitter ex-wife who can't move on." I stared at the message for a long moment, then forwarded it to Marcus with a note. "Document this. Add it to the evidence file." Then I blocked the number and poured myself another glass of wine. Mallory Prescott wanted to play games with the legal system. She'd chosen to sue a judge who had spent 15 years watching people try to manipulate, lie, and cheat their way through court proceedings. She'd just declared war on someone who knew every rule, every strategy, every possible move in this particular game. And unlike Mallory, I was patient enough to play the long game. I didn't need to win quickly or dramatically. I just needed to let the truth reveal itself, piece by documented piece, until there was no doubt about who was telling the truth and who was spinning a desperate fiction. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about something my mentor had told me years ago when I was just starting out as a prosecutor. The truth is like water. It finds every crack, every weakness, every opening. You don't have to force it. You just have to be patient enough to let it flow. Mallory had created cracks in her own story with every false allegation, every threatening message, every desperate attempt to control the narrative. Now, all I had to do was be patient and let the truth flow through those cracks until her entire fabrication collapsed under the weight of its own lies. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Sarah would file our response. We'd start the discovery process, and Mallory would realize that suing a judge wasn't the power move she'd thought it was. It was the biggest mistake of her life. The courthouse felt different when I walked through its doors as a defendant rather than a judge. It was the same marble floors, the same security checkpoint, the same bustling energy of people seeking justice or trying to avoid it. But my perspective had shifted in a way that made everything feel slightly surreal. I wasn't here to preside today. I was here to watch Judge Elizabeth Morrison handle the first hearing in Prescott versus Castellano. Sarah Kim met me in the hallway outside the courtroom, looking professional in a navy suit that probably represented a significant investment for a young attorney at a small firm. She carried a leather briefcase that appeared more worn than mine, filled with the comprehensive response we'd prepared over the past 2 weeks. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the nervous energy I could see in her eyes. "I've been ready for this my entire career," I replied, though I never expected to be on this side of the courtroom. We entered together, and I felt the weight of curious stares from the handful of people in the gallery. Word had spread through the legal community about this case, a sitting judge being sued for harassment by her ex-husband's new wife. It was the kind of gossip that lawyers lived for, the kind of scandal that would be discussed over drinks for months. I took my seat at the defendant's table, feeling the strange vulnerability of being the one waiting for judgment rather than delivering it. Sarah settled beside me, arranging her files with the methodical care of someone who knew she was being watched and evaluated. Marcus Chen entered with Mallory Prescott, and I got my first good look at the woman who had decided to make me the villain in her personal drama. Mallory was younger than I'd remembered from our brief encounters, probably in her early 30s, with carefully highlighted blonde hair and the kind of cultivated appearance that required significant time and money to maintain. She wore a pale pink dress that seemed calculated to project innocence and vulnerability, and she kept her eyes downcast as she walked to the plaintiff's table. The performance had begun. Daniel wasn't with her, I noticed. That was interesting. If Mallory's goal was truly to present herself as a victim of my alleged harassment, having her husband by her side would have strengthened that narrative. His absence suggested either that he'd refused to participate or that Mallory had decided his presence might complicate things. Judge Morrison entered, and we all rose. Elizabeth Morrison was in her late 50s, with silver hair she wore in a practical bun and a reputation for suffering fools exactly never. I'd appeared before her early in my career as a prosecutor, and she'd taught me more about courtroom procedure in 6 months than I'd learned in 3 years of law school. "Be seated," Judge Morrison said, her voice carrying the authority of 30 years on the bench. She looked down at the file before her, then looked up at both tables with an expression that suggested she'd already read everything and formed preliminary opinions about the merit of this case. "This is case number 47 CV 224891, Mallory Prescott versus Judge Victoria Castellano. Mr. Chen, Miss Kim, are both parties ready to proceed?" "Yes, Your Honor," they answered in unison. "Good. Let me start by saying that this court takes allegations of harassment very seriously, regardless of who the parties are. However, this court also takes its responsibility to prevent frivolous litigation very seriously." Judge Morrison's gaze settled on Marcus Chen. "Mr. Chen, I've reviewed the complaint your client filed. I've also reviewed the response filed by the defendant. Would you like to address the rather significant discrepancies between your client's allegations and the documentary evidence provided by the defendant?" Marcus Chen stood, tugging at his tie, a nervous gesture that told me he knew he was in trouble. "Your Honor, my client stands by her allegations. The defendant has provided what appears to be alibis for certain incidents, but that doesn't account for all of the harassment my client has experienced." "Doesn't account for it? Or can't account for it because it didn't happen?" Judge Morrison asked dryly. "Miss Kim, I assume you have something to say about this." Sarah stood, and I felt a surge of pride watching her shoulders square and her voice come out clear and confident. "Your Honor, the defendant has provided documentary evidence, including court transcripts, credit card records, and security footage, that definitively proves she could not have been at any of the locations where the plaintiff claims harassment occurred. Moreover, we have evidence that suggests the plaintiff has a pattern of making false allegations." "Objection!" Marcus Chen's voice rose. "Your Honor, any alleged pattern is not relevant to—" "Mr. Chen, sit down," Judge Morrison interrupted. "I'll decide what's relevant." "Miss Kim, I've reviewed your motion for expedited discovery. You're requesting the plaintiff's phone records, financial records, and documentation related to her previous marriages. That's an extensive request." "Yes, Your Honor, but we believe it's necessary given the serious nature of the allegations against Judge Castellano. If the plaintiff has a documented history of making similar false allegations, that goes directly to her credibility as the sole witness to the alleged harassment." Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers, a gesture I recognized because I'd adopted it myself years ago. "Mr. Chen, your client has made very specific allegations against a sitting judge. She's accused Judge Castellano of criminal behavior, stalking, vandalism, abuse of power. These are serious accusations that could damage Judge Castellano's reputation and career. Surely, you understand that the defendant has a right to defend herself thoroughly, which includes examining your client's credibility." "Your Honor, my client's previous relationships have no bearing on—" "I'll be the judge of that, Mr. Chen, literally." Judge Morrison's expression could have frozen lava. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm granting the defendant motion for expedited discovery with certain limitations. Ms. Kim, you'll get access to phone records for the 6-month period covered by the alleged harassment. You'll get financial records that might show where the plaintiff was during the alleged incidents. And you'll get documentation related to any restraining orders filed by or against the plaintiff in the past 10 years. Marcus Chen looked like he'd been punched. Your Honor, I object strenuously to— Your objection is noted and overruled. Mr. Chen, your client filed this lawsuit. She made these allegations. She opened this door. The defendant has every right to walk through it. Judge Morrison looked directly at Mallory, who had gone pale. Mrs. Prescott, I want to be very clear with you. This court operates on evidence, not emotions or accusations. If you have evidence of harassment, present it. If you don't, then we're going to have a serious conversation about Rule 11 sanctions and the consequences of filing frivolous lawsuits. Mallory stood up suddenly, ignoring Marcus Chen's attempt to stop her. Your Honor, Judge Castellano has been making my life a living hell. She can't accept that Daniel chose me, that he loves me, that their marriage is over. She's using her position and her connections to destroy me, and now she's trying to use the legal system to— Mrs. Prescott, sit down, Judge Morrison said, her voice like a whip crack. You are represented by counsel, which means you speak through your attorney, not by standing up and making speeches in my courtroom. Mr. Chen, control your client. Mallory sat down, but I could see tears streaming down her face. The performance was escalating. Your Honor, Marcus Chen said desperately, my client is clearly distressed by this process. Perhaps we could— What I think would be helpful, Judge Morrison interrupted, is for your client to consider whether she truly wants to proceed with this case. Because Ms. Kim is going to take her deposition, and I'm going to require your client to answer questions under oath about every single allegation she's made. And if it turns out that she's lied about any of them, there will be consequences beyond just losing this case. Judge Morrison looked at her calendar. Discovery deadline is set for 60 days from today. Depositions will begin in 30 days. Mr. Chen, I strongly suggest you have a very frank conversation with your client about the strength of her case and the potential consequences of proceeding. Ms. Kim, prepare your discovery requests and submit them within 1 week. Yes, Your Honor, Sarah said. Is there anything else? Judge Morrison asked. Sarah glanced at me, and I gave her a subtle nod. She stood again. Your Honor, there is one more matter. Since this hearing, the defendant has received multiple harassing communications from an unknown number, including threatening voicemails and text messages. We believe these communications may be coming from the plaintiff. Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose. You have evidence of this? We have the communications documented and saved, Your Honor. The content suggests personal knowledge of this case and makes direct threats against Judge Castellano. Mr. Chen, does your client have anything to say about this? Marcus Chen looked at Mallory, who was staring at the table and shaking her head. Your Honor, my client denies sending any such communications. Then she won't mind providing her phone records as part of discovery, Judge Morrison said. Ms. Kim, add that to your request, all phone records and text message logs for the plaintiff's phone numbers. If someone is actually harassing Judge Castellano, we need to know who it is. The hearing concluded shortly after, with Judge Morrison setting a schedule for the case and making it abundantly clear that she expected both parties to behave professionally going forward. As we filed out of the courtroom, I noticed Mallory whispering urgently to Marcus Chen, her earlier tears replaced by what looked like anger. In the hallway, Sarah and I walked toward the elevator in silence. Once we were alone in the elevator car, she let out a long breath. That went well, she said. Judge Morrison doesn't tolerate nonsense, I replied. She gave us exactly what we needed, full discovery and a clear warning to Mallory about the consequences of lying. Did you see Mallory's face when the judge mentioned phone records? I did. She knows we're going to find those harassing messages, and she knows what that means for her credibility. The elevator doors opened, and we walked toward the courthouse exit. As we pushed through the heavy doors into the afternoon sunlight, I saw Daniel standing on the courthouse steps. He looked worse than he had when he'd visited my chambers, more worn, more defeated. When he saw me, he approached quickly, ignoring Sarah's protective step forward. Victoria, please, I need to talk to you. Mr. Prescott, I said formally. You should know that anything you say to me right now could be discoverable in this case. If you want to talk to me, you should do it through your attorney or in a formal deposition. I don't care about that, Daniel said, his voice desperate. I need you to understand. Mallory isn't well. She's not thinking clearly. This lawsuit, the threats, all of it, it's not really about you. Then what is it about, Daniel? He ran his hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of distress. It's about control. It's about keeping me trapped in a marriage that's destroying both of us. When I tried to leave 6 months ago, she threatened to ruin me. She said she'd claim I abused her, that she'd destroy my reputation, that she'd make sure I lost everything. Sarah was taking notes discreetly on her phone. Good. This conversation was exactly the kind of evidence we needed. And when those threats didn't work, I prompted, she needed a new strategy. She decided that if she could make you the villain, if she could convince everyone that you were the problem, that you were harassing her, then I'd look like the loyal husband protecting his victimized wife. It would explain away any erratic behavior, any signs that our marriage was failing. Daniel's voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Victoria. I never wanted you to get dragged into this. You could testify to all of this, you know, I said quietly. You could tell the truth under oath about Mallory's threats and her motives for filing this lawsuit. Fear flashed across Daniel's face. I can't. You don't understand what she's capable of. If I testify against her, she'll what, Daniel? Make false accusations, destroy your reputation? She's already doing that. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. The difference is, now there's a record. Now there's evidence. Now there are consequences for her behavior. Your Honor, Victoria, please just drop the case. Let her win. It's not worth what she'll do to me if you fight this. I studied the man I'd once loved, the man I'd planned a future with, and I felt something unexpected, pity, not for our failed marriage or his betrayal, but for the fact that he'd exchanged one relationship for a prison. I'm not going to drop this case, Daniel. Not because I want revenge or because I can't let go, but because what Mallory is doing is wrong. She's abusing the legal system, she's making false accusations, and she's threatening people to get what she wants. If I let that behavior go unchallenged, what message does that send? It sends the message that you value your principles over my life, Daniel said bitterly. No, it sends the message that actions have consequences, that you can't lie and manipulate and threaten without eventually facing justice. I paused. But Daniel, I'm going to give you a choice. When we depose you, and we will depose you because you're listed as a witness, you can tell the truth under oath. You can testify about Mallory's threats, about the separation filing, about everything, or you can lie to protect her and face perjury charges. The choice is yours. Daniel stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. Sarah waited until he was out of earshot before speaking. That was quite the confession. It was, and it's exactly what we needed to hear. I pulled out my phone and texted Marcus, "Call me ASAP, we need to add Daniel to the witness list and schedule his deposition immediately." We walked to Sarah's car, where she'd offered to drive me back to my townhouse since I'd taken an Uber to the courthouse. As we drove through the city, Sarah kept glancing at me with curiosity. "Can I ask you something personal?" she finally said. "You can ask, I may not answer. Did you love him, Daniel, when you were married?" I thought about it, about the man I'd married a decade ago and the man he'd become. I loved who I thought he was. But people show you who they really are eventually. Daniel showed me that he was someone who could lie for years, who could build a secret life with another woman while pretending everything was fine at home. That's not someone I could ever really have loved. I just didn't know it yet. And now he's trapped with someone who's even worse than he is. Karma has a sense of irony, I agreed. Sarah dropped me off at my townhouse, and I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the discovery requests we'd be filing. Marcus had already started compiling information about Mallory's previous marriages, and what he'd found was damning. Richard Chen, Mallory's first husband, had provided Marcus with a detailed account of their marriage and divorce. According to Richard, Mallory had seemed perfect at first, charming, attentive, devoted, but once they were married, she'd become increasingly controlling and paranoid. When Richard finally filed for divorce after 3 years, Mallory had accused him of domestic violence, filed a police report with fabricated injuries, and tried to have him arrested. The case had fallen apart when Richard's attorney produced security footage from Richard's office building, showing him at work during the time Mallory claimed he'd assaulted her. The judge had dismissed the domestic violence claim and granted Richard a restraining order after Mallory began showing up at his workplace and sending him hundreds of messages a day. James Rivera, husband number 2, had a similar story. Their marriage had lasted less than 2 years before James realized that Mallory's need for control extended to every aspect of his life. When he tried to leave, Mallory accused him of having an affair with a co-worker and filed a lawsuit against the woman for alienation of affection. The lawsuit was dismissed as baseless, but not before Mallory had destroyed the woman's reputation at her workplace. James's restraining order was granted after Mallory slashed his tires, keyed his car, and sent threatening letters to his employer, claiming he was embezzling funds. The pattern was clear and consistent. When Mallory felt like she was losing control of a relationship, she lashed out with false accusations, harassment, and attempts to destroy the other person's life. And now she'd chosen me as her latest target. Oui. My phone rang, interrupting my review. It was Marcus. "I've got something interesting," he said without preamble. "I've been monitoring Mallory's social media accounts, the ones she doesn't know about. She's been posting in a private Facebook group for women dealing with divorce interference from ex-wives. Let me guess, she's painting herself as the victim. Worse, she's been giving other women advice on how to handle troublesome ex-wives, including suggestions about filing false harassment claims, manipulating custody situations, and using the legal system to punish women who won't stay in their lane." I felt cold anger settle in my chest. "Tell me you saved all of those posts, screenshots with timestamps." She's essentially created a how-to guide for harassment and legal abuse. "Send everything to Sarah immediately. This is exactly the kind of evidence we need to show pattern and intent." After hanging up with Marcus, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my kitchen window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Mallory Prescott was probably congratulating herself on her brilliant strategy, thinking she'd found the perfect way to control Daniel and punish me for the sin of having been married to him first. What she didn't understand was that every action she took, every threat she made, every false accusation she filed, it all left a trail, and I'd spent 15 years learning how to follow trails of evidence to their inevitable conclusions. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You're going to regret this. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. Daniel will never be free of me, and neither will you." I took a screenshot, saved it, forwarded it to Marcus and Sarah, then blocked the number. 3 threatening messages now, all documented, all following the same pattern as Mallory's previous behavior with her ex-husbands. She was building our case for us with every threat, every message, every desperate attempt to intimidate me into backing down. The next morning, I returned to my normal judicial duties, presiding over a complex civil case involving a contract dispute. It felt good to be back in my courtroom, back in control, back in the role where I belonged. But I couldn't help noticing the way some of the attorneys looked at me, the mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and, in some cases, barely concealed schadenfreude. During a break in proceedings, Patricia handed me a note. "This was delivered by courier this morning. It's marked personal and confidential. I opened it in my chambers and found a letter from Marcus Chen, Mallory's attorney. The tone was conciliatory, almost pleading. "Dear Judge Castellano," it began, "after careful consideration and consultation with my client, we would like to explore the possibility of settling this matter without further litigation. My client is willing to withdraw her complaint with prejudice and cover all of your legal fees to date, provided that you agree not to pursue sanctions or counterclaims. We believe this resolution would be in everyone's best interests and would avoid the time and expense of protracted litigation." I read the letter twice, then called Sarah. "I just received a settlement offer," I told her. "They want to drop the case with prejudice and pay my legal fees." "What are the conditions?" Sarah asked immediately. "No sanctions, no counterclaims, and presumably a confidentiality agreement, though they didn't explicitly say so." "They're scared," Sarah said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "They know what we're going to find in discovery, and they want to shut this down before it goes any further. What do you think I should do?" There was a pause, and I realized Sarah was carefully considering her answer. "As your attorney, I should probably advise you to take the settlement. You get your legal fees covered, the case goes away, and you don't have to spend the next several months dealing with depositions and hearings." "But," I prompted, "but as someone who's seen what Mallory Prescott has done to other people, as someone who's read about her pattern of behavior and her victims, I think letting her walk away sends the wrong message. She needs to face consequences, or she'll just do this to someone else." "That's what I think too," I said quietly. "So we reject the settlement. We reject the settlement. I'll draft a response that's professional but firm. We'll make it clear that we're not interested in settling and that we intend to pursue this case to its conclusion, including potential sanctions for filing a frivolous lawsuit. Consider it done." That afternoon, I had lunch with Judge Morrison in the courthouse cafeteria, something we did occasionally when our schedules aligned. Elizabeth had been following the case with interest, and she wanted to check in on how I was handling the stress of being a defendant. "You're taking this remarkably well," she observed, picking at her salad. "Most people would be a basket case by now." "I've had good training," I replied. "You taught me that emotions are for outside the courtroom, not in it. I also taught you that being human is not incompatible with being a judge." Elizabeth fixed me with a penetrating stare. "Victoria, are you angry about this? About what Mallory's done?" I thought about it carefully. I'm angry about the abuse of the legal system. I'm angry about the false accusations and the time being wasted on a case that should never have been filed. But I'm not angry at Mallory personally. I feel sorry for her, actually. She's so desperate to control her life and the people in it that she's willing to destroy anyone who gets in her way, including me. But the difference is, you have the tools to defend yourself. You have legal knowledge, resources, and a support system. Her previous victims didn't have those advantages. That's what makes this particularly egregious. She specifically targeted someone she thought would be too concerned about their reputation to fight back. Elizabeth nodded slowly. She miscalculated badly. She did. And now she's going to learn that judges aren't above the law, but we're also not victims who will quietly accept false accusations to avoid scandal. "The settlement offer Marcus sent you. Are you going to take it?" "No, I'm going to see this through." Elizabeth smiled, a rare expression of approval. "Good. Someone needs to hold that woman accountable." We finished our lunch discussing other cases, other matters, the everyday business of the courthouse. But as I walked back to my chambers, I thought about accountability and consequences and the strange path my life had taken. 6 months ago, I was simply a judge, respected, established, content in my career and my post-divorce life. Then Mallory Prescott had decided to file a lawsuit that she probably thought would terrorize me into silence or submission. Instead, she'd awakened something I'd kept carefully controlled for years, the prosecutor's instinct to pursue justice, not just for myself, but for everyone who'd been hurt by people who thought they could manipulate the system without consequences. That evening, Marcus stopped by my townhouse with more information. His investigation had expanded to include not just Mallory's previous marriages, but her entire history. "You need to see this," he said, spreading documents across my dining room table. "Mallory's real name isn't Mallory Prescott, it's Mallory Sue Bradford. She legally changed it after her second divorce." I picked up the name change document. Why would she change her name? Because Mallory Bradford has a record. Nothing major, mostly civil cases, small claims, disputes, restraining orders from people who aren't ex-husbands. But it's a pattern. She sues people, she files complaints, she creates drama wherever she goes. Brewer, how many lawsuits? 14 civil cases in 10 years. She sued landlords, employers, former friends, even a plastic surgeon. Most of the cases were dismissed or settled for nuisance value. But Vic, in every single case, she was the plaintiff. She's never been sued. She's always the one suing. I studied the list of cases, seeing the pattern. She uses litigation as a weapon. When she can't control a situation, she files a lawsuit to force people to engage with her, to give her power over them. Exactly. And now she's doing it to you. I thought about the settlement offer, about Marcus Chen's nervous letter trying to make this all go away. They know we're going to find all of this in discovery. That's why they're trying to settle. Of course they do. Once this pattern becomes part of the court record, Mallory's credibility is destroyed. No judge is going to believe she's a victim of harassment when she's got a documented history of being the harasser. My phone rang. It was Sarah. "Victoria, we have a problem," she said, her voice tense. "Marcus Chen just filed an emergency motion for a protective order. He's claiming that your investigator has been harassing Mallory, following her, contacting her former associates, trying to intimidate her." I looked at Marcus, who was listening to my end of the conversation. "That's ridiculous. Marcus has been conducting a standard background investigation using public records and voluntary witnesses. I know that, and you know that. But Chen is arguing that it's harassment and intimidation, and he's asking Judge Morrison to shut down our investigation and sanction us for improper conduct. When's the hearing? Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., emergency hearing." Abraham. After hanging up, I filled Marcus in on the situation. He looked more amused than concerned. "Let me guess. Mallory's spinning this as more evidence of your campaign of harassment against her." Probably. But this is actually good for us. It means they're desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. How is this good? I smiled, feeling the familiar thrill of strategy coming together. Because now we get to put you on the stand to testify about your investigation methods, which means we get to introduce evidence of everything you found. All those previous lawsuits, all those restraining orders, all those complaints. Chen just opened the door for us to present our entire case during what's supposed to be a hearing about investigator conduct. Marcus grinned. I love it when you go into prosecutor mode. I never really left prosecutor mode. I just learned to channel it from the bench. We spent the next 3 hours preparing for the emergency hearing, reviewing every step of Marcus's investigation, documenting every source, every record, every completely legal method he'd used to gather information. By the time we finished, we had a presentation that would not only defend Marcus's conduct, but would demonstrate exactly why his investigation had been necessary. The next morning, I walked into Judge Morrison's courtroom for the second time as a defendant. The gallery was fuller this time. Word had spread about the emergency hearing, and attorneys who had nothing better to do were filling the seats, eager to watch the drama unfold. Mallory was there with Marcus Chen, looking appropriately distressed. She dressed down from her previous court appearance, jeans and a simple blouse, minimal makeup, projecting the image of a woman under siege. Sarah and I took our seats at the defense table. My brother Marcus, not the attorney, sat in the gallery, ready to testify if needed. Judge Morrison entered, looking distinctly unimpressed by the whole situation. Mr. Chen, you filed an emergency motion for a protective order, she began without preamble. This better be a genuine emergency, because I don't appreciate having my calendar disrupted for theatrics. Your Honor, my client has been subjected to systematic harassment by the defendant's investigator, Marcus Chen said, standing quickly. This investigator has contacted my client's former employers, her former spouses, her friends and family, all in an attempt to intimidate her and manufacture evidence against her. Bro, Ms. Kim, I assume you have a response. Sarah stood, and I was pleased to see she looked completely composed. Your Honor, the defendant hired a licensed private investigator to conduct a routine background investigation using publicly available records and voluntary witnesses. Everything the investigator did was completely legal and proper. In fact, we've prepared a detailed report of his methods that we'd be happy to submit to the court. Your Honor, Marcus Chen interrupted. The scope of this investigation goes far beyond what's reasonable for defending a harassment claim. The defendant is conducting a witch hunt designed to— Mr. Chen, Judge Morrison interrupted. The defendant is facing serious allegations of criminal behavior. She has every right to investigate the credibility of her accuser, unless you're suggesting that there's something in the plaintiff's background that shouldn't be investigated. Abrofree, the courtroom went very quiet. Judge Morrison had just laid a trap, and I watched to see if Marcus Chen would walk into it. Your Honor, my client's past relationships and personal history are not relevant to whether the defendant harassed her. Then you won't mind if we explore that question in more detail, Judge Morrison said. Miss Kim, call your investigator to the stand. Brockry, my brother Marcus was sworn in and took the witness stand. Sarah approached him with confidence. Mr. Castellano, can you describe your qualifications as a private investigator? Marcus ran through his credentials. 20 years of experience, specialized training, an impeccable record. Then Sarah walked him through every step of his investigation of Mallory, and with each answer, the picture became clearer. Did you contact Mrs. Prescott's former husbands? Sarah asked. Yes, I did. Did either of them volunteer information to you? Yes, both Richard Chen and James Rivera were willing to discuss their experiences with Mrs. Prescott, including the restraining orders they obtained against her. Hebrew Marcus Chen was on his feet. Objection! Your Honor, this is completely irrelevant to— Overruled, Judge Morrison said. You filed this motion, Mr. Chen. You open this door. Sit down and let the witness finish. Mr. Castellano, Sarah continued. Did you discover any pattern in Mrs. Prescott's behavior toward her former spouses? Yes. Both men reported that Mrs. Prescott became controlling and abusive when they tried to end the relationships. Both men reported that she made false accusations against them and engaged in harassing behavior that required legal intervention. And did you find any similar patterns in other aspects of Mrs. Prescott's life? Yes. I discovered that Mrs. Prescott has filed 14 civil lawsuits in the past 10 years, all as a plaintiff. I also discovered that she legally changed her name after her second divorce, possibly to distance herself from her litigation history. Mallory was crying now, but Judge Morrison wasn't looking at her with sympathy. She was looking at her with the expression of a judge who just realized she was dealing with a serial litigant. "Mr. Castellano," Sarah said, "did you at any point threaten, intimidate, or harass Mrs. Prescott or anyone associated with her?" "No, I did not. Every interview was voluntary. Every record I accessed was publicly available. I conducted this investigation with the same professional standards I've maintained for 20 years. Thank you. No further questions." Ibrahim Marcus Chen stood for cross-examination, but I could see he was floundering. "Mr. Castellano, isn't it true that your sister is the defendant in this case?" "Yes, it is. And doesn't that create a bias in your investigation?" "My relationship to Judge Castellano motivated me to be more thorough and careful than usual, not less. I knew that everything I did would be scrutinized carefully, so I made sure every step was documented and every method was proper." Marcus Chen asked a few more questions, but they all backfired, giving Marcus another chance to explain the careful, legal methods he'd used. When Marcus stepped down, Judge Morrison looked at Marcus Chen with barely concealed irritation. "Mr. Chen, I'm denying your motion for a protective order. The defendant's investigator conducted a proper investigation using legal methods. If you have a problem with what he discovered, that's not a legal issue. That's a credibility issue for your client. But, Your Honor, I'm not finished," Judge Morrison said sharply. "I'm also issuing a warning to both parties. The discovery process will continue as scheduled. Both sides will comply with all requests within the legal limits. And, Mr. Chen, if you file another emergency motion without a genuine emergency, I will impose sanctions." "Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus Chen mumbled. As we filed out of the courtroom, I saw Mallory arguing with her attorney in heated whispers. Her carefully constructed facade of victimhood was cracking, and everyone in that courtroom had seen it. In the hallway, Sarah was practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you see her face? Did you see how the judge looked at her?" "I saw it," I said calmly, though I felt the same satisfaction. "But Sarah, remember, this was just a preliminary skirmish. The real battle comes during depositions. When do we depose Mallory?" "As soon as possible. File the notice today. Let's get her under oath before she has time to prepare any more carefully crafted lies." My brother Marcus joined us, grinning widely. "That was fun." "Can I testify in all your cases?" "You did well," I told him. "But the work isn't done. We need to keep digging. I want to know everything about Mallory Prescott, where she gets her money, who her friends are, what her day-to-day life looks like. Because somewhere in that information is the real reason she filed this lawsuit." "Already on it," Marcus assured me. As I walked back to my car, I saw Daniel standing in the parking garage, leaning against a concrete pillar as if he'd been waiting for me. He looked even worse than before. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had the defeated posture of a man who'd given up. "She's going to kill me," he said as I approached. "Not literally, but she might as well." I stopped a few feet away, maintaining professional distance. "Daniel, what do you want?" "I want to testify. I want to tell the truth about everything. The threats, the manipulation, the separation filing, all of it." He looked up at me, and I saw genuine desperation in his eyes. "I can't do this anymore, Victoria. I can't keep living in this nightmare." You understand what that means? Testifying against her? I understand that she's already destroyed my life. At least this way it'll mean something. At least I can stop her from destroying yours, too." I studied him for a long moment. "Call Sarah Kim tomorrow. She'll schedule your deposition." A broth. 3 weeks later, we sat in a conference room for Mallory's deposition. Sarah had prepared meticulously, with questions designed to trap Mallory in her own lies. I sat beside Sarah, silent but observant, watching as Mallory squirmed under the relentless questioning. "Mrs. Prescott, you claim Judge Castellano followed you to your yoga studio on September 15th. Is that correct?" "Yes," Mallory said, her voice tight. "And you're certain of that date?" "Absolutely." Sarah slid a document across the table. "This is a court transcript showing Judge Castellano was presiding over a hearing from 9 a.m. until 2:30 p.m. that day. The yoga studio is 40 minutes from the courthouse. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Mallory's face went pale. Maybe I got the date wrong. Let's try another date then. October 3rd, the coffee shop incident. For the next 4 hours, Sarah systematically dismantled every allegation Mallory had made. With each contradiction, each impossible timeline, each provable falsehood, Mallory became more desperate and angry. Finally, she snapped. Fine. You want the truth? I made it up, okay? All of it. I needed Daniel to stay with me, and the only way to do that was to create a crisis. If his ex-wife was harassing us, he'd have to choose me. He'd have to protect me. The court reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard, recording every word of the confession. Marcus Chen looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Mrs. Prescott, I strongly advise you to stop talking. No, Mallory shouted. I'm done pretending. She ruined everything by refusing to just settle. All she had to do was pay me to go away, but she had to be so righteous, so perfect, so determined to prove she was better than me. Sarah's expression remained neutral. So, you admit that your allegations were false and that you filed this lawsuit with the intent to harass and manipulate? Yes, Mallory said bitterly. Yes, I admit it. Are you happy now? 2 weeks after that deposition, Sarah and I stood before Judge Morrison for the final hearing. Marcus Chen had withdrawn from the case and Mallory was representing herself. Never a wise choice, but her options had run out. Judge Morrison looked at Mallory with the kind of cold disappointment reserved for people who had thoroughly wasted the court's time and resources. Mrs. Prescott, based on your deposition testimony and the evidence presented, I am dismissing this case with prejudice. Furthermore, I am imposing sanctions in the amount of $50,000 to cover Judge Castellano's legal fees and to serve as a deterrent against future frivolous litigation. Mallory started to protest, but Judge Morrison held up a hand. I'm not finished. I am also referring this matter to the State Bar Association for investigation into potential criminal charges for filing a false report and perjury. You may have thought you were clever, Mrs. Prescott, but you've committed serious offenses that have consequences beyond this civil case. Mallory collapsed into her chair, sobbing. I felt no satisfaction in her breakdown, only a weary acknowledgement that justice had been served. As we left the courtroom for the final time, Sarah turned to me with a smile. We did it. You did it, I corrected. You defended me brilliantly. I had a good client, she replied, one who understood that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting the truth speak for itself. 6 months later, I stood in my courtroom, presiding over a case with the usual mix of competence and authority. The scandal of Mallory's lawsuit had faded into courthouse gossip, and my reputation remained intact. Daniel had filed for divorce the day after Mallory's deposition. He'd sent me a brief email thanking me for giving him the courage to finally tell the truth. I'd wished him well and deleted the message. That chapter of my life was truly closed now. Mallory had been charged with perjury and filing a false police report. She'd pleaded guilty to reduced charges and received probation, along with a requirement to complete anger management and mental health counseling. Her name was now permanently attached to a cautionary tale about the dangers of manipulating the legal system. As for me, I'd learned something valuable through this entire ordeal. Being a judge didn't make me immune to life's complications, but it had given me the tools to navigate them with dignity and precision. That evening, Patricia knocked on my chamber door. Your Honor, there's someone here who'd like to speak with you. Sarah Kim. Sarah entered, looking professional but excited. I wanted to thank you in person. Because of the publicity from your case, my firm has gotten several new clients, people who need someone willing to stand up to bullies and fight frivolous lawsuits. I'm glad something positive came from this mess, I said. More than that, Sarah continued, I learned from watching you that being right isn't enough. You have to be patient, thorough, and willing to let the truth reveal itself in its own time. That's a lesson I'll carry through my entire career. After Sarah left, I gathered my things and prepared to head home. As I walked through the courthouse, I passed the courtroom where Mallory's case had been heard. The nameplate outside read Judge Elizabeth Morrison, and I smiled, remembering how Elizabeth had handled the case with firm fairness. Outside, the evening air was cool and crisp. I drove home to my townhouse, poured a glass of wine, and settled onto my couch with a book. A simple evening after an extraordinary few months. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Dinner next week? I promise to only investigate people for you, not discuss them over pasta. I smiled and typed back, Deal, but you're buying. As I set down my phone, I thought about the strange journey I'd taken from shocked defendant to strategic defender to ultimate victor. Mallory Prescott had tried to use the legal system as a weapon against me. But she'd forgotten a crucial detail. I knew that system better than almost anyone. She'd assumed that being a judge would make me vulnerable to scandal and eager to settle. Instead, my position had given me the knowledge, resources, and credibility to fight back effectively. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mallory had filed a frivolous lawsuit against a judge and, in doing so, had ensured her own downfall. She'd gambled that I would be too concerned with appearances to defend myself vigorously. She'd been wrong, and in the end, justice had prevailed, not because I was vindictive or vengeful, but because I'd had the patience to let the truth emerge and the courage to stand firm while it did. I raised my wine glass in a silent toast to truth, justice, and the beautiful simplicity of a legal system that, when used properly, protects the innocent and exposes the guilty. Tomorrow, I would return to my courtroom and continue doing the work I loved, but tonight, I would simply enjoy the peace that comes from knowing that even judges can be defendants, and that when we are, we face the same challenges and opportunities as everyone else who seeks justice. The only difference was that we knew exactly how to find it. Ibrokra. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.